Okay, awesome. All right. And I'm going to share screen. Okay. Oh, I already ruined the slides right there, but anyway, so welcome to Think and Drink number 9. Okay, we're going to be talking about the core, and I thought this was a really good topic or theme to really come about. It's something that we always wonder, like, what really is the value of core? Like, how, like, we feel like we overemphasizing on it, or is it underaddressed? Are we taking the right measures? And there's a lot of great studies that are out there that really measure core stability, and whether it's on the injury rehab side or on the athletic performance side, it's a great way for us clinicians, whether for athletic trainers, physical therapists, or even strength and conditioning coaches, just to really hone in on um, how can we all kind of center around the core. I mean, no pun intended, but this is something that we can definitely discuss about. And so we're going to talk about that core. We're going to talk about this core. We're even going to talk about this core. Like, are we going to go for the whole keg here? Are we really going to really buckle down and really look at the global aspect and see why do some of these tests that measure core stability, why are some of them having negative correlations, right? And I mean, reading these 3 articles, I mean, to be honest, I was trying to read them, and it's a lot of information. It really spun my head around, but a lot of the key points mentioned in all 3 of these articles really gets you reflecting on. It got me reflecting on my own clinical practice and wondering, like, are some of the exercises we're doing excessive, or should we really be measuring core stability in our practice, right? So to go over the objectives, we're always going to discuss about a current peer-reviewed journal article related to sports medicine or with other fields of healthcare. We're going to critically evaluate the evidence discussed in these journal articles, and then we're going to compare the evidence and see if we can bridge any of our performance gaps that were identified before the session. And as always, we're always going to be drinking and thinking responsibly at the same time. And I know this is already our 9th one, and I really appreciate participants like yourself, like Scott and Josh. You guys really keep this going, and it's really fun to just talk with other people about certain themes in sports medicine and really bounce ideas off of each other. I think it's always good to get fresh ideas and really learn from one another. And I think that's what's great about medicine in general. There's really no stopping in learning, right? We always keep ourselves fresh. All right, so we have no disclosures or any conflicts. All right, and then last but not least, cheers. I got some cab right here.
IPA again.
Yeah, IPA. There we go. I'm telling you, man, I got to go back on my IPA because I'm waiting to hear all the different thoughts you have on your mind, Scott. Wait, Josh, what you got drinking tonight?
It is also an IPA.
Oh, there we go. So you got 2 intelligent.
It's a mango. It's a mango.
Oh, yeah. Wait, where's that from? Oh, it's a mango. It's a mango IPA.
So Belching Beaver is a local brewery down here, and Costco is actually selling their beer right now. So I got a big old 24-pack.
Oh wow, that is awesome. That is awesome. Wait, Scott, where's your brewery from?
This is the Strike Brewery, which is, I think, a local Campbell one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You seem IPA.
So. Yeah.
I go back and forth between them and the 21st Amendment that's up in Hayward, I think. I try to stay local.
Yeah, 21st Amendment is good.
Yeah.
I got a kind of like a $2 Chuck kind of deal, but this is like a decent cab, and I'm just blessed to be hosting this. I love hosting, and I love hearing what other people say, and sometimes I like talking, and I hope I don't talk too much. So
you do a great job.
Right, we got another. Let's see. There we go. Awesome. We got
talk about an intellectual.
All right, we got Craig in the building. All right. Awesome. Welcome, Craig. Welcome to Think and Drink number 9. We just cheers. If you didn't bring a drink, that's okay. But we just went through the whole intro. We're going to talk about the core and everything about the core with our 3 journal articles. But cheers to you for joining.
Right, I'm gonna go grab one here in a bit. But
All right, yeah, there we go. That's the spirit. We got 2 IPAs and a cab going on right now. So
very nice.
we're excited. Yeah. So yeah, let's get started. Let's see. I'm gonna try to work.
I'm gonna hop right back, but I'm gonna go get it right now.
Okay, for sure. Yeah. Here we'll wait for you. We're not in a rush.
All right.
We'll keep. We actually got to get Craig to introduce himself too. Take our time.
Isn't it a little ironic? We're all drinking alcohol and beer, and we're talking about core strength.
Yeah. I feel like I'm going from a 6-pack to a keg already. That's for sure.
I mean, I
Or a
have a
barrel.
core. You can't see it, but it's
Oh,
there.
yeah. That is true. You got a good point there, Josh. You got a good point.
And you don't forget about your arm core, your leg core, your back core.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing all these movement links, right? Just trying to get them, trying to work the elbow flexion and radial deviation, trying to sip on my wine.
There you go.
Yeah. This is awesome. Yeah, I'm just glancing over at the abstracts, and I don't know, man. I think, yeah, these articles are good. I thought there was one that had really interesting results, but I couldn't tell if it was like a small sample size or something like that. All right, Craig, what you got?
Party Wolf IPA.
Oh, another IPA. There we go. Awesome. Party Wolf. All right. Yeah, we got 3 IPAs. So Scott and Josh have a running joke saying that the IPA is always drunk by intellectuals.
I agree with that.
There we go. All right, Craig. So since you're new to the Think and Drink, why don't you give a brief introduction about yourself, where you're from, and where do you work at?
I'm originally from Marshfield, Wisconsin, but I work in Valparaiso, Indiana. That's where I currently live as well. I work exclusively at a high school as an athletic trainer and physical education teacher.
Awesome. Great. How long have you been at the high school setting?
This is my 12th year at Valparaiso High School. I've be my 17th year as a teacher and 26th year as an athletic trainer.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you on board. Scott and Josh, if you guys want to introduce yourself for Craig, I don't know if you guys have met.
Haven't met them. No.
All right.
No, I have not. I'll go real quick. My name is Josh. I'm an athletic trainer at San Diego State, working with football, men's and women's tennis. Undergrad at Kansas State, and then master's at the University of Akron a few years back.
Very good. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Craig, my name is Scott. I work as the head athletic trainer at Archbishop Meady High School. Been there a long time now, 14 years going on. Let me ask you this, Craig. Do you know where Rochester, Indiana is?
Rochester, I'm familiar with it, but don't go there quite too often.
My mom and dad are from there, so I got an aunt and uncle who are live in Indianapolis right now. So I got some Hoosier roots too. So
okay,
good to see you there.
Hoosiers. Awesome.
Nice to meet you, Scott.
Nice to meet you, Craig.
All right, we'll do a second cheers. Get Craig in there. Awesome. All right, let's get started. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go over our first study. So the way that I kind of wanted to format this was just going from more of the rehab side, just seeing more of like the clinical aspect of it in, let's say, in like a PT clinic or in an athletic training facility, how we're gonna measure core stability, and then we go more into the strength conditioning, later on with the article from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So first off, we had a study by Butowicz, Courtney Butowicz, and her colleagues. It's on the validation of 2 clinical measures of core stability. So this study was a cross-sectional design, and they had 20 healthy active individuals, and they looked at a series of different core stability tests. So we had, so they wanted to correlate these tests together to see if they can validate any of these measuring tools for core stability. So you had tests such as the trunk stability test, which was you were sitting on a Swiss ball, and your arms were crossed, and you lifted one of your legs, and you held that position for 30 seconds, and you counted errors, right? So it's kind of like a best test, but it's on a Swiss ball. You're sitting on a Swiss ball. And then they were also looking at the unilateral, they were looking at the unilateral hip bridge endurance test. So this one it's your typical hip bridge, but once you do the hip bridge, you're gonna extend one of your legs, and you're gonna try to hold that for as long as you can. So they were looking at those 2 tests, and they were trying to correlate those with the lab clinical version of the core stability test. So this one, I'm trying to see how they would name this test. They really call this like a lab-based, I'm trying to, if anyone wants to fill in real quick, I think it was pretty much like a lab-based test that kind of served as the gold standard, because they had a lot of different biomechanical measures to it. They were looking at center of pressure, and they had eyes closed mean velocity of center of pressure, all these different biomechanical variables, and trying to correlate with the trunk stability test and the unilateral hip bridge endurance test. So they had the lab. So let's recap. They had the trunk stability test, the unilateral hip bridge endurance test, and they were correlating that with the lab biomechanical test, and they were looking at the Y balance test. And then they were also looking at the trunk endurance test, where they're strapped down to a table, and you're trying to hold that position for as long as you can. So it's the trunk extensor endurance test. You have belts strapped onto a table, and you try to hold that prone position off the table for as long as you can. So it was a lot of different studies to look at and trying to match where the correlation was. But what I found interesting in the results was that there was little to no correlation between the trunk stability test and the lab-based biomechanical measures of core stability. So looking at the pictures and seeing how the subject was positioned, they were, in a sense, very similar, but there was really no correlation between the two. So when I first read that, I felt like that seemed kind of odd. Like it kind of made my head spin about, like, then what exactly is core, right? Like if we're looking at it from like a lab-based clinical measure, and we're seeing it from without any sort of biomechanical measuring tool, I mean, one would definitely assume, well, there should be some positive correlation with it, but in this study, it didn't really show any correlation. So I thought that was weird. I don't know what your guys' thoughts were, or if there's anything else that you guys thought about with the tests.
Didn't they have a conclusion or reach the thought maybe it wasn't so much core strength they were measuring in those, like those 2 tests, but it was more your hip mobility? I thought they mentioned something like that in there at one point.
I'm trying to see.
Their conclusions.
Yeah.
And it sounded like the TST or whatever was almost something that they had come up with recently. It wasn't really a standard test.
Yeah. I think the two tests, I think these two tests, the trunk stability test and the hip bridge endurance test, those two, they were considered novel tests. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find where they were talking about the hip.
Yeah.
But I think it did say the trunk stability test demonstrated a significant relationship with the Y balance test and explained up to 19% of the Y balance test variance.
Yeah.
So my question is it more of, does core really contribute more to balance? Like if you worked on, let's say, like you did planks and you did bridges and then you did the best test again, would you have a better score?
It's a good question.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how how deeply associated is core with balance.
I can only draw a comparison between possibly like testing doing like a best test on the high school kids and them not having very good control or very bad balance. Is that because they have a poor core, or is that because they haven't practiced it? I think a lot of the studies I've seen we use Sway Balance, which is a iPhone balance tester, but I want to say all the collegiate numbers are always higher than the adolescents. So I wonder if that correlates to it in some ways. So maybe does that mean you have better core strength? I don't know.
Yeah, I think
better balance.
Yeah, the interesting thing though is, I'm glad you mentioned that, because with concussion testing and balance, I think in this study too, when they discussed their methods, I think I highlighted this. I think it was saying that the part of the exclusion criteria was that they didn't have any concussion current or within the previous 6 months. There wasn't any injury or any diagnosed balance disorder. So they were trying to exclude any sort of criteria that had to do with like the vestibular system. Yeah. And so to see how one of the core tests had some sort of significant relationship with like the Y balance test, that kind of gets you, that kind of, to me, that kind of gives off like a little bit of, well, is it really like is core stability really contributing to balance, or is it just it says there's significant, but there's still something left to be desired, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So I want to believe that training, stabilization exercises, your planks, your, some of your core endurance type stuff, that it would make you somebody who's better at balancing. Mm-hmm. But I bet you could have really great balance and by all definitions have a not strong core.
Right.
But does the person with good balance probably have better core control? Maybe, but maybe not. I don't know. I mean, proprioception is so different from traditional core training, right? Like, should having a strong core help? Absolutely. But some people, like the best test, you got to close your eyes. It's a completely different factor. Right. That brings in so much more than just being good at doing in planks or being, post-chain endurance stuff. I don't know. It's just a different kind of way to think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like, I'm curious why they put the Y balance test as something to look into in this study. If they were really looking at core stability. Like, I feel like just throwing in the Y balance test didn't, like, it wasn't necessary, in my opinion. Or it made it a little more confusing.
I would only theorize that maybe they threw the Y balance in just because of their trunk stability test. It's somewhat similar.
Right.
That's the only thing I can think of why they would do that. But I agree with you. I think it's a little bit odd to throw that one balance test in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Right. Yeah, I think just and even looking at the results, and then like I hate it when we read some of these journal articles and it's just like you read it and then most of the results just have no correlation, and this is like, why publish this article? It's like it gets so frustrating. But I thought what was pretty cool was, or even after mentioning that there was no correlation between the trunk stability test and the biomechanical test, I mean, for some weird reason, the unilateral hip bridge endurance test had a better significant relationship with the biomechanical test, but it was just in a completely different subject positioning. And I think with the sample size that they had and based on the study design, it looked like they were going somewhere with this, like just seeing like, okay, well, at least one of these tests shows some sort of validity, and the trunk stability test is not as great compared to the unilateral hip bridge endurance test. Yeah,
I mean,
I thought, yeah.
Looking at the two tests, I mean, I'm not all that surprised by it. I can't tell you that I would ever use them sitting on a Swiss ball and picking a foot up and looking for errors as anything that I would consider true core control, or
Right.
a tool that would be able to tell me that. I don't know. I don't see the relevance in especially the sports world.
Yeah.
How often, I mean, what are they, a professional gamer? I mean, how often are you going to find yourself in that position and need to test how good you are at balancing?
Yeah.
I hate to throw the functional word around, but it's not a functional movement at all.
Yeah, I don't know why it would be that applicable to sports. Just, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the I guess esports or gaming. I think it's just like, oh, what if you sat on a cushion and try to beat your opponent, and the trunk stability test will really assess how well you'll succeed in this game just based off of your gaming seating cushion. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you wouldn't see this or like, I don't know, maybe if someone got tackled and sat on their butt, and I don't know, that one instance really applies to the trunk stability test. Like, there's really no point in having this trunk stability test. I completely agree.
I'm also a little surprised that they didn't see much of a relationship between the hip bridge endurance and the
Like extension.
table endurance.
Oh yeah, the
I
trunk
really thought that
extender.
those two, I thought for sure those two would mesh.
Huh.
But they if I read it correctly, they did not find a good relationship there.
Yeah, it's that oh, you're talking about the hip bridge and the trunk extensor. There's
Yeah.
little to no non-significant correlation. Yeah. Yeah, I was always it's interesting because the trunk extensors, isn't it with core stability, you want less of your erector spinae muscle, or yeah, like your spinal muscles to activate as much, and you have to use other muscles, your other like hip extensor muscles to truly get your trunk extended. Like, I feel like that test really just lights up all those spinal muscles that you don't necessarily want to have them activated when it comes to core stability.
Yeah, in that next sentence it says the UHBE test may primarily address multiplanar lumbopelvic neuromuscular control and localized muscle capacity, while the trunk extensor endurance test primarily assesses the global. So it's kind of like what you're saying there, Phil. Like it's going for the bigger muscle groups and just kind of overpowering. Like I wonder if being strapped to that table, they're not fully activating, the glutes and everything else coming into holding that trunk into extension. Because of that position where in the hip bridge, you don't have a choice. Like it's going to be doing what it's supposed to. I don't know. Just
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was an interesting study though. I think I felt like now seeing that like the unilateral hip bridge endurance test had like that was like the only test that really stood out from the two clinical measures that they were exploring in this study. It really made sense with what the core really is all about. It's not just like your abdominals, you also have your hips involved. And it's a global structure. There's nothing, you can't pinpoint, like you can't say it's a six pack, or you can't really say it's like your obliques, right? It's more than just that. And so I think reading the study, it definitely highlighted that, it definitely highlighted that, and really showing like really showing that hip bridge is a good tool to it's a tool to be considered. I wouldn't say it's a good tool, but it's a tool to be considered to look at core stability.
Have you guys done any classes on the postural restoration out of Nebraska?
No, but do share.
it's on the to-do list.
It's a good thing to look into. Postural Restoration Institute. He has a lot of stuff on how the diaphragm affects the core, the position of rib cage and diaphragm. And one of his corrective exercises, it's not a full hip bridge, but basically you will do deep breathing where you're in a double leg bridged position with your butt just about 2 inches off the table, and makes you focus on deep breathing and recruiting your glutes and your hammies as opposed to your hip flexors and all that, and abdominals. And I've seen some hip flexor pain, groin pain go away from doing it. And then he also, if you have one side of the body involved, he does do the one-legged bridge, kind of like that's showed in this study. So
Okay, yeah.
so,
Well,
I
want to ask you this, Craig, since you've taken PRI.
I haven't. I just
haven't. Oh, you.
I've just watched a lot of videos and read as much stuff that's free. I've dug into it a little bit.
That's the way to do it, right?
I don't have the $2,000 to pay for a class right now, so.
It's like you should be on everyone's. Yeah. I do want to ask, do you feel like an ideal core stability measuring tool should incorporate breathing?
I think so, yeah. Especially looking at the rib cage staying down. When your rib cage is flared up, it limits limits shoulder motion, limits a lot of different things. I mean, I've had kids, for track purposes come in after a race and say my hammies are really tight, and straight leg raise to about 45 degrees.
Uh-huh.
And I do that double leg bridge with deep breathing for 8 deep breaths, and they hit 90 degrees after they finish that little simple exercise. Didn't stretch a hamstring, didn't do it, didn't work on stretching the muscle, just worked on core and rib cage position.
Oh, yeah.
So, and the same thing I've seen it with lack of lack of internal rotation in the shoulder, the same kind of doing this similar things. If they're lacking internal rotation in the shoulder, doing the breathing can correct that as well.
Yeah, that's
But,
powerful, man.
hopefully one of these days, my school will give me some money, get a little extra money to go take that course. But
right, yeah, add that to the budget.
yeah,
Yeah. Josh and Scott, what do you guys think?
Scott, you first.
I think if you look at like how I focus on rehabbing kids in lower backs right now, a big focus has been on breathing and diaphragmatic breathing, getting the kids to engage their core and teaching them how to fire their transverse abdominis a little bit better, right? And if they don't do it correctly, if they're breathing incorrectly, you don't get that. So to get them to engage that core a little bit more, you have to teach them that breathing. I think that's important. And I'd see this term a lot, the diaphragmatic breathing is a kind of a new trend. Everybody's doing it. So, that's how I focus on that type of thing. I think it's definitely beneficial. It takes kids a while to get it though. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I think breathing is absolutely important. And that when you clearly find somebody who's dysfunctional in breathing, that you should address the problem in your rehab session in where you can. I wonder, being in college football, how much that translates to maybe they master it in their rehab or they improve in their rehab and maybe their symptoms start to get better. How likely is it that when they're in the heat of practice, heat of a game, and their adrenaline's going and they've been out there for a long time, how much carryover does that actually have to when they're getting into those stressful situations, and can they truly take a step back and get back to that good controlled breathing when they're in those compromising positions? We hear all the time, you need to own the position that you're in. You need to be able to have breaths in that position. I totally agree. That we should train that. I wonder how much carryover there is, in these situations. Because all the time, I got my guys right now going through conditioning, and they're so out of shape because they've been home for 4 months with nothing to do, and it's talking them through. All right, you need to slow it down. We need to have an exhale. It's twice as long as your inhale, and in through the nose, out through the mouth. Each breath, slow it down. And they're sitting here going, and they're just making themselves worse. And some of the guys can look inside themselves and calm it down and start to feel better within seconds. And some of the guys just can't. They just can't do it. And you see it happen on the field. They start making mistakes. They have to get pulled out because they're too exhausted after a long drive. Now, maybe working on that in a rehab session or, in training is their big problem. Maybe they need to be better at that. Maybe there is that carryover. But long-winded rant over. I truly wonder how much it carries over.
Yeah.
No, I think if.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think if, depending on your situation, if you have a strength coach, or even we don't have a strength coach at my high school, so it'd be talking to the individual coaches, but even maybe educating them on it to when they're doing conditioning and practice, that they're kind of getting the kids to focus on the breathing between their runs and body position. Have you guys, because I guess back in the day when you're getting a side stitch and you're trying to stretch out the diaphragm, they wanted you to be tall, and get
that was
the
so
knuckles up and stand tall. And with the postural restoration, it definitely, with the ribs down, the whole bent over, taking your breaths actually kind of works with that. So I didn't know, from your guys' perspective, have you seen that where kids are holding down or kind of hunched over, hands on the knees, doing better at recovering?
Oh yeah, I think recently there was that study that came out, and then I know, and they were looking at those two different positions, whether if they have their hands on their knees or they're standing up nice and tall, and just looking at, I think one of the measures was just looking at heart rate recovery and seeing how fast they can drop down on what their heart rate is like. And I remember, like, when that study came out and it got really popular, I think it was something like Derek Carr from the Raiders, and he was tweeting about that whole study, and he was just like, man, so you're telling me that the coaches were lying to me the entire time, that I couldn't put my hands on my knees, and and it's so interesting now. It's like and it made sense because naturally we want to do that. Like naturally our body wants to hunch over, put our hands on our knees, and that was comfortable for us. But then at the same time, it was just kind of that like, oh, it makes you look weak if you put your hands on your knees and you're not standing up nice and tall. But and I think if you guys are familiar with Mike Boyle, he's a very well renowned strength coach, and he's saying, well, you do, like, if you're in a competition and you want to trick your opponent, yeah, you put your hands on your knees and look like you're really tired, but actually you're recovering a lot faster than your opponent, who's most likely going to be trying to stand nice and tall. So I thought that rationale and just what we're talking about too, it's interesting how we came across like diaphragm and breathing and man, yeah, we just opened up a whole new avenue with core stability and just seeing like how we're drifting into the diaphragm. And yeah, the core stability, it could be more than just the muscles and like the isometric contractions and looking at hips, abdominals, but now people are talking about the diaphragm, and now it's just like maybe the core could potentially be the entire system. Like we haven't really addressed like the nervous system, and you know we're looking at breathing and seeing how, you know, we're looking at the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, and we're seeing like a dual function with the diaphragm, and I feel like there's still so much more to learn, but people are coming up with all these different perspectives, and it's interesting how core stability has changed over the years. But yeah, it was a lot to definitely wrap your head around, especially with this study and seeing like how there's so many, like the correlations are all over the place, but at the same time it did paint some sort of a picture where you can kind of lead to like maybe this is what core stability could be, right? Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next article. Right, we have, so this one we're getting more into that transition of looking at the trunk endurance plank test and seeing how it correlates with athletic performance tests. So I really like this study. I think Dr. Imai and their colleague, I thought this was pretty interesting how they kind of took a lot of the different studies that were already done and seeing how there wasn't really much correlation with any power tests. Like if you're looking at vertical jump height and core stability, there wasn't really a strong correlation, or it was, some evidence was conflicting, but they looked at core stability or even the trunk endurance, and they looked at that measure and correlating that with running endurance or any sort of endurance test, and with the results they did see a lot better correlation with any sort of anaerobic endurance tests, the Cooper test, the step 50 agility test, a lot of change of direction. And then when they compared it to tests that were more emphasized on power, such as the 30-meter sprint, the counter movement jump, the rebound jump, there wasn't much of a correlation. And I know they discussed in their conclusion that like the sample size was a little bit too specific. It had adolescent male soccer players, and it was 55 adolescent male soccer players, and they performed the prone and the side plank tests as described by Stuart McGill, who we all know he's kind of like the guru in studying the spine, but just the results that just the results that came with this test, it was nice to see a correlation with running endurance and seeing that, well, is core stability still valuable in power movements? I think that question still remains. I don't know what you guys' thoughts on that. I thought this study was pretty well done for what
It
how
was.
they
I just
presented
was. It was, but I guess I was surprised too that you didn't see it in the power movements, because I know, and again, there's so many things that affect the core. But when I previous to being in Indiana, I was in Colorado and had the chance to work with um, some of the different Olympic level track sprint coaches, and that's one thing that the sprint coach I worked with said is if a kid doesn't know how to contract their transverse abdominis and they're fast, I can make them faster. So he'd work on basically on planks and core and getting them to set the transverse abdominis and be able to hold that, especially in the sprint, for their entire time sprinting. And he said that was the only change I did, and I would see a drop. He would see a drop in time. And then Paul Check, I don't know if you guys have, he was I think physical therapist, but long time ago he had a book for golfing, and kind of that same thing, that for the golf swing, that if the athlete or a golfer took their swing and then without contracting their transverse abdominis, and then he got them to contract the transverse abdominis during the swing, it added 15 yards to their shot. So I guess that just from some personal experience, from especially with sprinting, this kind of surprised me that we didn't see some correlation between power and core stability, I guess, with the planks. But
right. Yeah.
But I do also see why it would definitely help with the long distance running, or like with the beep test, going back and forth, that having good postural control is going to help you do a better test on that. But and it was what, moderate for the 50-meter agility test.
Let's see. It says, let's see. Yeah, I think it was highly correlated with the yo-yo intermittent recovery test, and then moderately correlated with the Cooper test. So the Cooper test, that was your long distance.
Yeah, 12 minutes for
run as far as you can in 12 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I feel like, yeah, I completely agree. I think it still didn't rule out like core, like I feel like this article could have really changed some perspective of people saying, oh, well, if there's only a stronger correlation with endurance type activities, or like anaerobic endurance, kind of like your change of direction agility tests, but it doesn't really help on your jump, then why do core exercises for, let's say, like a high jumper or a long jump? I think that's kind of the thing that hasn't been demystified yet. I think there's still some more studies that can be done to show that core stability is important for power exercises. Like, I'm pretty sure there should be studies out there that talk about the experiences that you mentioned, Craig, about activating the transversus abdominis and seeing maybe after doing a 6-week program, and after after someone's mastered on how to control the transversus abdominis, they see an improvement in their golf swing or doing like a power exercise. And I would like to see those kinds of studies come out.
Be cool.
Yeah.
Are you guys in the position to do studies yourselves, or like Philip, is anybody in the collegiate setting that they can do that, or?
Josh, it's all you, bud.
Definitely not going to be seeing any studies coming out of San Diego State anytime soon, especially right now. I mean, we're swamped with what we have to do daily. But, how long was the plank for? I'm having a hard time, and I don't remember what they said.
Let's see.
I think they played until they lost position, didn't they?
So like, if it really was for that length of time, I'm not, surprised that to see a correlation between an endurance core exercise and an endurance running exercise, right? Like, you trained for exactly what that test was looking for. I would be curious of what would be a good measurement of core true power. Would it be like a rotational med ball toss that you can measure the velo of the ball coming out or something? Like, I would love to see if there's a correlation in some sort of power to go look and see if there's does that also help in the endurance exercises?
Like, so Josh, you're saying like honing in on the core itself and that rotational movement.
Yeah, like, I don't know how you would properly, it's easy to measure an endurance thing. It's just how long can you hold the plank, but how would you measure core power?
Yeah.
I truly don't know. Like, it's a real question. I don't.
The power of the exercise or just power of the core?
The core. I mean, what are we getting out of that plank? We're getting a true endurance measurement out of your ability to hold that position from the core musculature. So how would you guys go about isolating the core musculature's power?
The only thing I've seen is in that Paul Check book for golfing, he had a modified like blood pressure cuff. So the pad of the blood pressure cuff was underneath the low back. And so when the athlete would contract their transverse abdominis, the back would flatten into the blood pressure cuff, and the needle would go up to so many millimeters of mercury or whatever, what the unit is for that. So that was something that he did to make sure they had good core engagement, that they had to hit a certain range on that modified blood pressure cuff. So I don't know if that book was written 20 some years ago. So I don't know if they still have that instrument out there or not, but
I've seen something similar with our PTs that when working on like low back patients, they'll put that like an inflated cuff under their low back so they get like kind of the sensation of when they're getting the proper inflation. It sounds very similar to what you're talking about. I personally haven't used it, but I've seen similar type things been set up in the clinic. But yeah, I don't know. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to butt in there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're doing an endurance test. It's no surprise that it's not correlating over to direct power. You might have a fast switch individual there. You might not. They're youth soccer. They haven't developed all that much yet. So you might have some kid who can run long distances naturally. It's also what they train for. So I don't know. I think the study is good. I think they looked at some really good things, but I think it almost kind of plays into their favor for the exact type of training that they do.
So if we did sprinters and jumpers, if we tested them, we might see a totally different.
Absolutely. I think you would too.
Yeah.
I think you would, because you'd probably see some kids who absolutely cannot hold a good plank, but they have a great sprint and jump. But they have bad core endurance. I almost guarantee you that would be the result that you'd see. And it wouldn't correlate at all.
Yeah.
Bill, I'd just like to tear apart studies. We went through it last week with the shoes. Sorry.
No, this is why I love having a variety of voices. It's good to tear apart studies sometimes and just like, what are they thinking? How could we apply this? And yeah, so just to allude to what happened last week, we had a study. We were looking at different risk factors for running related injuries, and it was a really drawn out study of all these different methods. And long story short, they didn't even do the study. It was just proposed, like, this is what they were going to do for the methods. And just reading it, and I almost felt guilty for saying, hey, everyone, let's read this for the Think and Drink number 8. But it was good to just, we read it and we're like, wow, they're actually trying to make an impact with this article that hasn't really gone in any results. So there's articles like that, and that's why we always get together every other Thursday to really read through the literature and see what's out there. But yeah, going back to this study, it's I completely agree with what everyone is saying, and I think it's I still hold true to just, I think there's still something left to be explored when it comes to different core exercises that can really evaluate power. I think that's something that's and I think obviously with the subjects chosen in this article, I think what this article mentioned was, well, maybe we could look at female soccer players, right? This one's just, it's 55 adolescent male soccer players, and it'd be worthwhile to see what it's like for maybe we're looking at weekend warriors. Like, would they be able to do the yo-yo intermittent recovery test and things like that? Like, probably not, but I think it would be interesting to see, like, maybe if they were able to do the prone and the side plank tests, there would still be some sort of correlation that's worthwhile, because they're not necessarily specialized in this sport where they're not used to that anaerobic endurance nature, if that makes sense. Like, if they were looking at subjects that were more into that partook in general activities, then I feel like the correlation would be a lot more impactful.
Yeah, I agree, Phil. I think like you said, it was extremely limited because of their study design. Like, you got results that I'm not surprised by because of the type of training and athletes that they are. And not that you'd be able to do all of this stuff, like you said, with a weekend warrior and untrained individual, but I think you would get a truer sense of how important core endurance is once you got those results. And if you saw correlations, I think then that makes a lot of sense and it's really impactful. It almost takes away from their results because of their study design of their population.
Yeah, I agree. Man, that's awesome. Yeah, Scott, I know you're about to say something.
So I would have thought that the soccer players would have been better with the step 50 test, which seemed like a lot more change of direction to me, because that's what they do on a field. Stop, start, stop, start, start, start. More ability stuff. But the yo-yo test seemed to be their go-to, and that to me says that's an endurance thing, right? It's what they do.
Right.
They just run all day. The Cooper test and the yo-yo test seem to be the big things. But I thought that would have seen more correlation with the step 50 test.
Yeah, that's interesting. You pointed that out. Yeah, I was surprised that I was surprised too that that they didn't do as well, or there wasn't really much of a correlation, or it was poor correlation really with the step 50 agility test. But yeah, I think but yeah, I wonder if, let's say, if we took some of the novel tests and put that into this study that we're talking about right now, and I wonder if that has a correlation, because if we're looking at the plank, there's different positions that are involved in the unilateral hip bridge. We're looking at one side of the bridging position, and that might play into a factor of the step 50 agility test, because we're looking at different changes of direction. So I think that would be interesting to look at too, if there was if other tests, not just like the plank, not just the plank test, that would be involved. If I had to redo the study, I think that would be interesting to look at.
All right, that's your first one in PT school.
That's why I'm going back, right?
Bill, you had asked Craig what he thought, if he thought that breathing should be a portion of like an important core test.
Yeah.
And a factor, absolutely. I think personally, one of the tests, like the core endurance, should absolutely be a part of like a core assessment. How long can you hold a plank? It's easy. It should translate across a lot of things. Maybe not if you're a soccer player who's an adolescent, but I think unilateral an aspect is almost crucial if you're in the sports world to test that core in some way. I don't know what that would be. I don't know if that would be a unilateral hip bridge. I don't know if that would be a single leg balance, or maybe we're getting too many other factors in at that point. But I think finding a way to not have all four bases support is really important, because how often does an athlete stay in that position? Not very.
Well, yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, because a lot of the sports don't. Yeah, like who cares about a time, like how long you take to hold that position, right? It doesn't directly translate to the nature of the sport, where you're always in different positions.
I think it's definitely a factor. Like being able to hold like a 3-minute plank, that's great. Like you're probably a pretty good athlete, but it doesn't mean that you're a good athlete. And it just goes back to like doing an ACL rehab right now. Like early on, you do a lot of, obviously closed chain, but dual stance support. But I'm starting to push harder and harder the further we get out of just heavy, hard unilateral exercises, because I know that that's what's going to translate. Do I want him to squat a lot of weight? Yeah, sure, that's great. But I would rather him be able to do a split squat or a moving lunge at a moderate weight for a good amount of reps, like a good velocity, because that's going to translate. So how do you test that in an athlete for their true core, whatever you want to look at?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I just think, like, if we're talking about trying to design an exercise or movements to assess the core, I think that should be a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point you brought up.
Josh, let me ask all you guys too. Like when I eval somebody who comes up with a back pain, I never do really muscle testing on their core. You see them in the books, the resist extension, resist flexion, but I've never really done those. I use it more on where their pain is, what's going on with them, what their limits and flexibility are. But is that something we would need to address? Can we do an assessment on their strength? Or is it just too hard to, you think?
First, so I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, I guess for low back pain, I don't check their strength necessarily either, but the first thing that I'm going to go to is core activation exercises.
Yeah.
If it's a bad case and they can't do much, Craig had touched on the transverse. That's the first thing I go to. Put them on a table, put their feet up, and start doing transverse draw-ins and start getting that activation, and then we go from there. But I don't know, maybe I'm missing a portion of, but at the same time, because my train of thought is the first thing we need to do is start to get that core to do its job better, potentially, depending on what the findings are. Maybe it's a disc issue and we need to do a whole nother set of stuff, but that's still going to be part of it. My first process is going to be core exercises anyway, so I'll get a visualization pretty quickly of how strong the core is based on the rehab that I'm probably going to do anyway. I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't thought about that.
I think we all theorize that a patient comes in with low back pain and they're weak in the core, so we need to work on that. But none of us have a really good way of measuring that in some ways, I think so.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a good point that you brought up, Scott. It's like how like if we're associating core stability with low back pain, then there's not really a strong criteria or a popular criteria that we would use. It's just more of like a pain, like sometimes pain and maybe even like a patient reported outcome, right? Like it's just you give them like a survey to do and see where they're at subjectively, but um yeah, there's nothing that there could be more objective tools to really assess where they're at from low back pain. I think that's something that's um that
Maybe.
hopefully later on in the future there's something out there, right? Awesome, cool. Sorry, I thought it was just like that weird pause. I was like, wait a second, did I say something wrong? But there's but yeah, I think yeah, let's move on to our final article. Yeah, we're getting a lot of information out of today's Think and Drink, and I'm kind of I'm really happy that we're able to talk about this and really share all of our ideas. All of our ideas. I don't know why I said never mind. Anyway, that was anyway. Um so this study, I thought this so this one is, can a standardized visual assessment of squatting technique and core stability predict injury? When this article came out, and I know a lot of some people on Twitter were tweeting about this article too, and I had mixed feelings about this article because it really it kind of just made me think of, well, what's the difference between this and FMS? Like it still it kind of had that tone of like, well, how simple can we get to predicting injury? Let's still come up with a cluster of tests, and with these different movement patterns, we can assess core stability, and hopefully that would give us an idea on how to predict injury. And these researchers from Ireland, they were looking at the Gaelic football, or the Gaelic games. I'm not too familiar with the Gaelic games, but it seems like there's a lot of different field activities, and um, they were looking at a subject, or they were looking at a population. I'm trying to see how many subjects that they looked at. I think it looks like they had a little less than 300 subjects that were all Gaelic footballers or hurlers, um, and they were all coming from 6 different schools and 2 collegiate institutions. And they looked at the they looked at the overhead squat, and then they were looking at the single leg squat and the core stability push-up test. So a lot of these, or I should say 2 of these tests are modified, or I want to say they're inspired by FMS. We're seeing a lot of that trend, just seeing what Gray Cook had out when that trend started, and it's still going. It really made us think about how we could predict injuries looking at these different fundamental movements. And the jury is still out there when it comes to FMS and looking at foundational movements, right? There's there's still controversies with just assessing movement and seeing like, oh, because you have this sort of compensation, it's not good for injury, or it's not good for staying healthy, right? It still had that vibe of like, well, we did this study, we saw, we looked at these Gaelic players, and this is what it came out to be. It almost seemed like it was a novel idea, like how like how they kind of simplified the FMS and added that single leg squat and and kind of produced a new idea for people to really consider.
I would say too, I was excited. I like, this sounds like a great idea because one of our strength coaches tried FMS for one of our teams. It ended up being a nightmare. It took too long to do it. Didn't really get any results from it. Didn't pay off very well. So I'm like, this is great. We're going to have an easier study. We got 3 ones. And then like you, Phil, I was like, oh, no, maybe not. It's just as hard. Just doesn't work as well. And I think FMS and all these things, there seems to be a subjective part of it too, where the rater is rating somebody, and sometimes everybody's going to be a little bit different. So I thought that was interesting.
Right. Yeah, and I think what bothered me too, and I think this, I'm not sold on quantifying what is meant to be subjective in nature. Like I think it just doesn't make sense to me. Like you can't put a point value to what you see, or I should take that back. That could be taken in so many different ways. But when we're talking about squatting and there's knee valgus, like to what degree is that bad? Right, then we're talking about different measuring units and things like that. Like to what degree do we allow that? And when it comes to like the FMS and the system, it was just kind of like well, I'll give you a 2 or I'd give you a 3, just depending on how well you squat. And it kind of, in a way, it didn't really click with me. Like, why do we still quantify? Like, is it because we try to make these systems more efficient, or should we really just trust what we see and not have to worry about points?
Yeah, I think I don't do the FMS anymore just because of time. And like you said, you kind of notice if someone pronates too much or, valgus too much and such. You kind of eyeball what it is and make notes of it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we see the research that says the FMS doesn't correlate well to actually, doing much on the tail end of preventing injuries. And that a lot of the tests don't correlate well to predicting the injury. Sometimes I wonder if it's like a job security thing. Hey, let's do this. Let's see what we can fix. And then we definitely have work to do. But, like you guys are all saying, that have actually tried to implement this, the time that goes into trying to get it all together is just immense. So then how does that play into your other duties that you already have to do? And I don't know. So I'm more, and like you were saying, Phil, it's hard to put a number on things. That kind of goes back to another thing I said last week, is you have a collegiate runner with a certain form that's already gotten them to this point, but it's incorrect. So there are certain things that are absolutely bad while doing a squat that could lead to injury, and you try to correct them as is. But, every single person is going to squat different. Every single person is going to single leg squat different and do those push-ups different. Some people just move different. Some people run different.
Yeah.
Like you said, the valgus. I mean, the anatomical aspects to the hip come into play. How wide are you letting their feet go? Are they narrow stance? Are they wide? Are their toes out? Like, there's just so many factors that may not be bad to the degree that they need to be changed. You can't make a perfect team squat with great form 100%. It's just not going to happen. And maybe the way they lift is not going to predispose them to injury because it's how they've developed this whole time. And I think that sometimes we get lost with trying to make things too perfect. Whereas they're an athlete who have gotten, this is all college-based stuff here. Maybe you can make a change to a younger athlete and it's going to help them out. But by the time I see some of these kids, like, I don't know, maybe the change isn't worth the effort or the reward on the outcome. Maybe we don't change a single thing and they still tear their ACL. Obviously it's a catastrophic injury. Let's assume it's non-contact. I don't know, but
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
that's a short way to say what I keep rambling about.
Exactly.
Yes. That quote will definitely. That quote is like a lifetime quote. It's already like in the Hall of Fame. That is definitely true by the letter. That is definitely something.
Sorry to interrupt, Phil. Have you guys seen the I think it's the like world record holder in the marathon, the Kenyan guy? And if you watch him run, his valgus, his forefoot is awful. He's got the worst mechanics ever, but he's like a world record runner. So obviously there's something wrong with this form. Nobody's corrected it, but it works for him.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I think there's also that Usain Bolt article where he had that leg length discrepancy, and he's regarded as the fastest man in the world. Like why would we have to worry about like pronation in his foot if that helps him perform, or that potentially could help him perform?
Right.
Or it could take away from what he's already developed,
Exactly, yeah.
Who's going to take that risk on Usain Bolt?
Right.
I'm not. He's going to tell me how to run.
Right. Yeah, that is true. Shoot, I wanted to go back to where they were talking about the points, and yeah, I just like it's still the way that they were looking at the ratings. Like they looked at if you looked at table 1 with the squatting technique and the scoring system, it was like it was still subjective to the point, right? It's like directly above or behind the toes. So, but does that mean it like you still had a wide variability and could put that as no issue? Like things like that. It just kind of it didn't really help me buy into the fact that these tests would really assess core stability or not assessing core stability, but do these really predict injury? Yeah, it was an interesting study, even though they had like a large sample size. And then I think even with the results of this, it didn't really. Let's see. I think I highlighted here. They're talking about like the sensitivity of the model wasn't that great. Like you couldn't really tease out any subjects who you couldn't tease out any subjects that that would be susceptible to any sort of whole body injury. Or I think that's what I'm getting at from this article.
Hey, Phil.
Yeah.
I got to go.
You gotta go? All right. Yeah, I know we're going a little late, but yeah, I think there's not really much left to discuss about this article. But yeah, feel free to head out. Yeah.
Gentlemen, it was great talking to you all.
See you, bud.
Nice seeing you, Josh.
Later, guys.
Later. Okay, all right. We'll wrap up here real quick, unless if there's anything else that you guys want to chime in on with O'Connor's study here.
I got to know more about Gaelic games, I guess. I got to learn more about them. Sounds interesting. But
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Is that like the caber toss, or is that what that is?
That might be. I thought it would be like one of those like long log poles, and they would like try to like get it across like a little river or something. Whatever they show on ESPN, the Ocho, but
yeah,
it's whatever those like yeah, it's one of those that they carry like logs and things like that, and they try to hurl it over. I think that's what they're talking
I
about.
think so too, but
In the article, I thought it said it was kind of a cross between lacrosse and field hockey, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, that would make more sense.
and that's I think because they talked about Gaelic games and they talked about Gaelic football, huh? And
Yeah,
Gaelic football sounds like it's more that cross.
yeah, that makes sense. I think sure, if we had like a special think and drink, maybe we could watch highlights of
There you
Gaelic
go.
football and really pinpoint on that experience and see what that's like. Man,
Sounds good to me.
yeah, awesome. Okay, let's wrap it up here. So this is usually our last call. I mean, it's a think and drink, so we have that last call for alcohol, last call for any ideas, anything that you guys want to share. I know we went a little bit over the hour that we typically do, but this is definitely something that I thought I learned a lot from these 3 articles, and it was really cool to hear about diaphragmatic breathing, and maybe that's something that we could incorporate in when assessing core stability, and I think it's just a good reminder to know that core stability, there's still so much more to learn about it.
Yep, definitely.
I would agree with that. I think this opens my eyes a little bit more too. And maybe, hey, when I evaluate somebody, I look at things a little bit differently. Or, when a lot of times with my eval, I make somebody do a squat and I look at things a little bit more now. So I think it'll be helpful.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Awesome. Cool. I'm glad we got to have this think and drink number 9 and talking about a lot of things about core. I really think we definitely hit our objectives today. So how it's gonna work? So as far as the next think and drink, I really want to have think and drink 10, just because 10 is a great number to really start to slow things down. But yeah, we'll plan on having the think and drink 2 Thursdays from now. I'm not sure what's gonna happen beyond the think and drink, because I'm trying to find someone to really take over and host as I try to get through PT school. So this is something that I'm actually moving to Florida next Wednesday and start school then. So with that said, what's going to happen is I'm going to ask my colleague Paca to send out post think and drink surveys. Everyone's eligible to get 1 category A CEU. It is definitely worth it after just having a nice discussion about core stability. And it's just a nice survey just to kind of reflect on our session and what you guys want for the next session and what we would talk about and things like that. And yeah, it's I'm really glad that we've made it to number 9, and I'm really looking forward to think and drink number 10. So I really thank you guys for tuning in. With that said, I know you guys are on the mailing list, so I'll keep you guys updated. Typically, what we'll do is we'll send out the post think and drink surveys this week, and then Monday we introduce the new topic. So keep an eye out for that. I'll still advertise on Twitter. I'll advertise to everyone else, and definitely if you like this session, definitely spread the word to your colleagues.
Sounds great.
We'll do. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks again for having us, Phil.
Yes, thank you.
Very nice to meet you, bud.
Nice to meet you too, Scott.
All right, you guys have a great evening.
All right, good night, guys.
See ya.
Take care.